Welcome, everyone, to Talking Back to Suicide. This is your host, Diana, also known as Dr. Diane Kaufman. I am a poet, artist, humanism and medicine awardee, a retired adult and child psychiatrist, and I'm the founder director of the Hold On campaign for suicide prevention that uses the power of art to educate, connect, express, and heal. And my co host on Talking Back to Suicide is Kino Isaac, coming to us from South Africa. Kino is a DJ, a music producer, entrepreneur, and most importantly, a mental health advocate for independent artists. Our special guest today on Talking Back to Suicide is Mark Blacknell, who, in transforming his pain into purpose, is the author of Just Stare at the Wall, Living the Universe from Where You Sit. From the working class outskirts of Philadelphia, Mark is not your typical meditation teacher. A former Teamster and U.S. Marine, he came home from service racked with PTSD and spent 20 years cycling through VA counseling, jobs, jails, and a substance abuse program before finding stability in the simplest possible practice, sitting still and facing a wall. Ordained in the Soto Zen tradition, but now working independently, Mark teaches a stripped down, accessible approach grounded in lived experience rather than hierarchy. He works with veterans, senior citizens, at risk youth, athletes, and death row inmates across Florida. His teaching is plain spoken, direct, and free of spiritual performance. Mark explains the hard part is not the knowing of what we ought to do, it's doing of it, especially when our mind feels like it's spinning out of control and everything feels loud, urgent, and overwhelming. Mark's meditation outreach is supported by donations and can also be available for free. Mark's been a featured guest on the BBC and National Public Radio. So, warm welcome, Mark, to Talking Back to Suicide. And we're really delighted you can be with us today.
Well, thank you so much. When you were doing that introduction, a storm rolled in and there's thunder outside.
The heavens are announcing you're here,
I
and
would
it's
say so.
it's there too. Wow. I'm thinking that we have storms in nature and we have storms in our human nature. So maybe that's a good place to begin. All right. So, Mark, tell us a bit about the storms that you were traversing in your life, starting maybe in your childhood, leading up into becoming a Marine, and what happened afterwards.
So, yes, my life has been stormy to say the least. I kind of grew up in the Philadelphia area, it was a working class area. And I just remember a lot of fist fights and bullies, and it was pretty violent from what I recall. I mean, we were working class kids with little supervision. Our parents worked. My father worked at a factory. He was a union guy at night. So he worked all night and slept during the day. And mom worked too. So most of the kids, we just ran free. And it was pretty heavy duty, on the violent side. Now that I look back then it was kind of normal for people to fight and blood to be on the ground. But I don't know if that was everybody's experience, but it certainly was mine when I was young. And my dad, like I said, he was a union guy. So he would take me to his union meetings, the United Auto Workers Union. And that was rough. I mean, people would fight at the meetings, and I was always the only kid there. He kind of wanted to show me, what it was all about. So he was kind of workers of the world unite type of guy, a socialist, which, in the United States, you don't want to say that out loud, but he certainly was back then. Once I reached high school, I didn't really have much of a direction as far as, and at least in my family, my parents pressured me quite a bit. It was all, what are you going to do when you graduate? What kind of career are you going to have? What's your vocation going to be? I had no clue. I still have no clue, by the way, and I'm 56 years old. But there was a lot of pressure there. So when I graduated high school, I got a job with the union, the Teamsters Union, not the same one as my father. And it was there that I got involved with a guy named Little Sween, whose father was Big Sween. And I became a bookie. I don't know if you know what a bookie is. Nowadays, gambling is legalized in most places. You have apps. But back then you had to call the bookie to make a bet, and it was illegal. So I got involved in that pretty heavily. I joined the Marines because I couldn't take the pressure. I always thought the police were tapping into my phone, or you'd see a car on the street and I thought they were going to get me. I was the low person on the totem pole. So, they come after the little guy to get to the big guy. So I didn't really understand what I was involved in, to be honest, but I knew I was going to end up in trouble with the law if I didn't get away. So, because I was so stressed out over all of that, I joined the Marines, which is to get away from stress. You probably don't want to join the Marines. And I didn't want to just join the Marines. I wanted to join the Marines of the Marines. I wanted to be in special forces, so to speak. So I ended up being in what's called a fast team in a security forces detachment. And I was pretty much overseas my whole enlistment. I tend not to, I don't really want to relive it here or to detail. I'm not that kind of guy. I've kind of moved on from it all and taken the good parts of the Marines, the discipline and the confidence, and left kind of the machismo and the war stories and all of that. But I can say that when I got out, I was a mess. I mean, I was an alcoholic for sure, because when you're a Marine, you experience really stressful situations. And most of us, we drank to cope with it. And I mean, drank hard. I mean, we were, the Marine Corps was formed in a tavern. So I think that tradition was still alive when I was in. But severe PTSD, which I still have, by the way, you never really recover totally from all of these things. They pop up in certain times. But I think the difference now is that I know how to cope with it in a sustainable and healthy manner. I know how to look at it differently. But when I first got out, I had no coping mechanisms and I couldn't, well, I did resort to violence a few times. In the Marines, you get your aggression out with violence, drinking, aggressive type things like that. But all of a sudden you're a civilian and you can't cope the same way. You have to kind of figure out new ways to cope. And for the first couple of years, I was definitely suicidal. I think veterans face that type of thing more than most because number one, we know how to handle deadly weapons. We're very comfortable with them. And then everything that we saw was so taxing on our systems and so mind-boggling and hard to justify and comprehend that, you kind of go into some really dark places and you feel alone. And for me, I felt like I didn't fit in anywhere, not in school, not even when I went to the bar, I was different. The only guys I related to there were the Vietnam vets and so not to laugh about it, but when I look back, I was really, really suffering. I had legitimate mental health issues and I had them even though I made it through college. I did well. I got a master's degree. I ended up working for the governor of Pennsylvania and doing all these wonderful things. I never ever felt good inside. There was always this darkness and this dread kind of. It manifests differently for different people, but for me, it manifested in my stomach like a feeling like someone close to me had passed away. And I would have neck pain and shoulder pain, and my stomach was always upset. And I would have panic attacks where, the world felt like it was spinning. I suffered with those symptoms despite the fact that I was able to function. My relationships failed consistently. It was hard to hold a relationship in that state. But I managed to get it together enough to get an education and get a good job and all that. But something was really, really off in me and I knew it. And I didn't know how to address it. Marines typically, especially when I was younger, I wasn't the type to reach out for help. I was going to overcome it myself. I don't know how I thought that was going to happen. I had no plan. But the real change happened when I was living on the island of Maui and my ex wife became pregnant with my daughter. And that was the impetus for me to finally address my mental health situation realistically. That was like the first step. So meditation came later, but my real first step was focusing on what resources were available to me, number one, and then actually getting in my car and driving to, in my case, it was the vet center. There's the VA, and then vet centers are kind of for combat veterans and veterans that have seen heavy action. They're their own entity. So I just walked in, and this Dr. Evans, excuse me, he said, "How can I help you?" And I just said, "I've been a mess for a long time and I'm about to have a daughter and I need your help." And that's kind of how everything started. And that was about 20 years ago. That's when everything changed for me, when I addressed the issue, figured out where to get help, and then mustered up the courage to get in the car and go there. I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but I did it. Yeah.
Excuse me, Mark. How many years later was that from when you left the Marines?
Let me do the older we get, the harder it is to do the math, as you well know, I'm sure. But let's see. So that would have been about 2008. So 18 years ago. So that was a good 15, 20 years after I got out that I finally went for help, suffering that whole time, in and out of depression. I mean, I remember years of depression where I didn't see any way out of it. But somehow I kept going and, I'd find little pockets of escape in alcohol, in big decisions like leaving my job and going to a kibbutz in Israel and making a documentary film. Like I did that. I cashed in my retirement and figured out a way to connect with people over there and did it. But really, I was running. Everywhere I went, I was kind of thinking a change of environment or a change of scenery would, in some way, make me feel better and cure me, but it never did. It followed me no matter where I went. But when I finally admitted I needed help and then actually focused on getting help, that was the first step. And then I went through years of counseling. I had to buy into counseling. It took me, my medication journey is very similar to my meditation journey. I always joke around and say that medication and meditation go very well together if you have a legitimate PTSD or legitimate mental health problem. But it wasn't till I was stable enough, I found the right meds. It took me over a year working with a psychiatrist to find the right meds. That was a grueling thing to stick with it. I had somebody I could actually articulate what was going on with the meds, and they kept adjusting and changing until we finally got it right. It ended up being a really simple combination, a low dose of two meds that I'm still on today, by the way. But that was a journey in itself. And then I went through prolonged exposure therapy, various counseling over the years. And then when I was stable enough where I had a little space, that's when I started experimenting with meditation. So meditation, I think, is only great if it can only be effective if you have a level of stability established. I don't look at it as a cure or anything like that. But for me, it was kind of the cherry on top of the cake. It's what brought it all together and allowed me to, like I said, I still have PTSD and I still have panic and depression and all of these things. But I think the difference is the way I look at it and the way I respond to it on the fly in my daily life. And meditation, stopping my life and putting myself in a balanced meditation position, stopping all the external stimuli and actually forcing myself to take a look at my mind and my feelings and my emotions. That's what allowed me to get where I am today, which is a point of relative stability, which, there was a point in my life where I never thought I would be the stable one in my family or my community as it is now. I never even imagined that I could be in that position. but here I am.
How did you begin to learn about meditation? Was that something that was brought up in your counseling sessions or, in your own life experiences?
Yeah, believe it or not, I was first exposed to what's called Vipassana meditation in Israel on the kibbutz because a lot of they're forced to serve in the military. It's mandatory. So the kids would come out and they would be similar to me. So I could relate to these veterans. And a lot of people in Israel, when they get out of their mandatory service, they take off to places like India and Thailand. And they brought Eastern practices back to Israel. And the particular kibbutz I was on and the people I knew, they were into meditation. So, kind of the seed of meditation was first planted then. But I didn't take it serious. I wasn't in a stable enough position to have the discipline to do it on a daily basis. And it wasn't until I sought, professional mental health clinical support that I remembered meditation. It was always on my mind, and I read books about Buddhism and meditation and things of that nature. So it was always in the back of my mind. The seed had been planted, as I call it, but it was up to me to nourish that seed because the seed needs balanced conditions to grow.
Mhm.
If a seed's on concrete and it's getting run over by traffic all day, it doesn't have the environment to grow. But it was in Israel that that seed was planted. Then I ended up in Maui, where meditation and Buddhism and Eastern philosophy, it's kind of the mecca for that type of thing. You know, Israel, Jerusalem's the mecca for monotheistic religions, but Maui's the mecca for alternative or Eastern religion. And I was exposed to it there. I was kind of turned off on Maui, on Maui, to be honest, because there was a lot of privileged people who, out loud claimed they were aware and enlightened, and but those people weren't. Joe the plumber wasn't, and I kind of got turned off to the whole thing. I'm a Marine from Philly. If you tell me you're enlightened, I know you're not immediately. It's kind of like being, facing heavy duty stuff in the Marines. If a guy's talking about all these war stories, chances are he wasn't there because he's not going to want to talk about that, especially not to complete strangers. So I kind of got turned off, but I pestered this really well-known counterculture legend, let's put it. I don't like to drop names and I don't want to drop names, but I respected this guy. And he was, 30 years older than me, and he had done all these amazing things. And I emailed him one day and I just said, "I can't believe you're still alive. I would like to talk to you someday." and that's all the email said. And he thought it was cool. And we kind of developed a relationship. And he kept telling me to read this meditation book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. He said, "I'm telling you, man," we became friends, sort of, basically, because I kept pestering him. And he must have saw something in me, something of himself in me. He kept telling me to read this book. And I said, "Nah, man, I lived on Maui for 5, 6 years. I'm not interested in Buddhism." He's like, "I'm telling you, this book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, is real. The guy's not even alive. He's not selling anything. And if you pick it up, you'll realize he's not." So he kept telling me his message was consistent. So one day I ordered the book and I got it and I just started reading it. And basically, Suzuki Roshi, who ended up being my great grandfather in my Buddhist lineage, he's basically saying, I can talk all day about this, but really you're in the perfect position to do it right now. You're already, you're no different than me. Just meditate and see what happens. Don't have any big expectations. Don't think it's going to cure you or anything. Just do it. Just meditate. Give it a try. I mean, what do you have to lose? That's basically what he was saying. He was saying it in a very Japanese Buddhist way. He's from a different generation. But for whatever reason, I just started doing what I put the book down and started doing it. And then I started noticing, I did it at the park on my lunch hour at first, where I did it on with pillows on the ground. I didn't buy any equipment or anything. I just started doing what the guy said. And I can't say that I saw a difference right away or I felt a difference right away. Something inside of me said, this is good for you. Kind of like we know saving money's good, brushing our teeth's good, exercising is good. Yeah. So something in me knew putting yourself in this balanced position is good. And I pestered, the guy that I really admired who turned me on to the book. And he wasn't teaching at the time, but I pestered him for years and years and years. And finally, he trusted me and I respected his boundaries and he became my teacher. And then all these years later, meditation and the things I learned in Zen Buddhism, they're just part of my normal, everyday, ordinary life now. So I don't see my normal life, my everyday routine as separate from my spiritual or meditation practice. It's been so ingrained in my life that my whole life is kind of focus and being in awe of how everything's connected. And, it's a miracle. And every day when I stop and put myself in that position, like I wake up in the morning and I meditate, and the whole world feels like it's spinning, and I feel like I'm vibrating and I'm kind of off balance. But then, after 5, 10 minutes of meditation, everything stabilizes, the whole world, the whole universe stabilizes, and I can actually focus, and then I can actually be in my life. And for a Marine like me, with all the things I've been through, to be able to focus, it's just a miracle. But it took a lot of work. So it took me years to really, let's say, benefit from it. I'd say my family and friends noticed after about 6 months. But I wasn't like a born again meditator. I wasn't out saying, oh, you got to try meditation. I just did it in front of the wall in my house. I didn't really tell anybody. I just did it. And people started to notice. They were like, man, what's up with you? You seem calmer. You seem happier. You seem more focused. And you're actually listening to me. So I didn't really feel that much different in myself, but I knew it was working when other people told me it was working. Like they could see it. So I always shy away. I warn people, don't become a born again meditator and start, trying to teach it and telling everybody how great it is to stare at a wall, because they'll probably think you joined a cult or stopped taking your meds. And I also warn about that. I started to feel really good, like better than I had since I got out of the Marines. And I thought about quitting my medication. I thought about stopping counseling. But then I caught myself and I said, no, no, no. It's working. Whatever's working, stick with. Forget all the stigmas about, mental health treatment and medication. Forget all that. Just keep doing what you're doing. It's working. Something's changing. So I warn, I've had people who have worked with me, they start feeling great and they quit their meds and they quit their treatment, and then their life falls to shambles. And then they come back to me and the first thing I asked was, you did not quit your meds, did you? And 9 out of 10 times they did, because of that social stigma or whatever that voice is within them that tells them they should need that or that that's weakness. So really, I've come to a point now where I call it raw acceptance or simplification on a atom molecular level. I keep everything really, really simple. I only think unless I have to. And then I really don't have to think that much because I already know what to do, like to take care of my kids, to plan financially. Somehow, meditation has taught me how to catch myself when I start drifting off into some fantasy or some sort of bad feeling. It's not that I ignore bad feelings or anxiety. It's the exact opposite. Now I just stop. I say, Mark, you're feeling a little depressed today. You have that sinking feeling. You need to take care of yourself today. You need to be easy on yourself today, Mark. And then I think, God, I don't know how I lived like that. I don't know how I didn't pull the trigger. So it's really taken the bad emotions, so-called bad or dark or you know, the feelings that kind of kept me down. It's actually made them more like partners now. Like they teach me, I learn from them as opposed to being afraid of them or running from them or trying to escape. I've learned to like make them part of the team, I think that's the key.
Mark, when you use the word meditation and meditation practice, could you explain what you mean by that? What is meditation and how do we do it?
It's you could learn it in a minute. I'm not promoting my website, but it shows you how to do it in about a minute. You just take your hands, you put them a certain way in a balanced position, one over the other. You drop them on your lap. Your left leg is balanced, your right leg is balanced. You could do it in a chair, you could do it in various positions. But the point is you're just putting yourself in this position, this balanced position that you can learn in 1 minute. And then you're just sitting down. I suggest 5 minutes at first, and you do it. Now, when you're meditating, all you're doing, you're not scanning yourself. You're not trying to stop thinking. All you're doing is kind of observing yourself as if you're watching a Netflix show. So you're trying to watch yourself without all the typical judgments and excuses that would stop you from doing it. So you're just watching. And if you do that over and over and over and over again, it's kind of like a soccer player. The rest of the world calls it football. We call it soccer. You're practicing your ball handling, your shots. You're practicing every element of the game every day. If you're a professional soccer player, you have practiced that for 20 years, where the ball is kind of an extension of your body and your body kind of makes the decisions. And in fact, if a soccer player, when they're lined up to kick a penalty shot, overthinks it, they're going to miss. So what you see is as professional footballers line up to shoot, they always take deep breaths before they shoot. That's meditation. They're clearing their minds. So all they're doing is just getting in this position that you can learn for 1 minute, and then you experiment with it day after day after day after day. Like me, it might take 10 years for you to actually develop a routine, but if it's in your mind, your body knows that it's good for you somehow. So all it is allowing the balanced position, the balance of nature. Everything in nature is balanced. We hear work-life balance. We hear balanced checkbook. You need balance to ride a bike. You need a balance to dance. You need balance to play sports. All this is the practice of balance. It's not mystical. You don't need to believe anything. All you need to believe is that the sun and the earth are the perfect size, age, and distance from one another, and that's why everything exists. The sun and earth are in perfect balance and perfect equilibrium, even though as human beings, we can think, the planet and everything is off balance. That's kind of in our heads. This is practicing balance each day and experimenting with it and becoming pretty much your own teacher. So,
When you just said experiment with it, what do you mean by experiment?
well, when you're sitting there, let's say you start at 5 minutes. I start people at 5 minutes for 2 weeks. It's never the same twice. Some days you're going to feel a certain way. Maybe something's bothering you intellectually in your mind. Maybe your left leg hurts that day. Maybe it's as vast as the universe itself. And each person's different. So I can't really say what the experimentation would look like. All I can say is just watch with, don't think it's going to cure you or you're going to talk to God or you're going to get all that out of your mind. Just do it and see what happens. And then you'll start experimenting. Like maybe you're too close to the wall. Maybe you're going to want to move back from the wall. Maybe the position you're sitting in is getting in the way too much and you need to try sitting in a chair. Maybe your hands are too far apart and when you bring your thumbs together in the position, it's uncomfortable. Maybe you notice that your neck hurts, but if you move it a little to the right in meditation, it doesn't hurt anymore. It's little things like that. And you notice how your breath changes depending on what you're thinking and feeling. It's all these little minute subtle things that are different for each person.
In
So
in
you
the way that in the way that, you've practiced, do you keep your eyes open or closed during the meditation, and does it make any difference which way you do it?
That question makes my heart soar like an eagle. I love that question. We keep our eyes open, and the reason we keep our eyes open, I can use a bunch of different reasons, but the real reason is most of the time when our eyes are closed, we're sleeping, and this is about being fully awake and fully focused. Another good one I like to use is if I'm driving in traffic and someone cuts me off, and my practice is to close my eyes to relax, if I do that while I'm driving, I'm going to crash. So, this is about being awake. This is about bringing the meditation into your everyday life, not escaping. So, when you close your eyes, you're either sleeping or maybe you have some idea that closing your eyes will make you more relaxed. The cool thing is, though, is when I show people how to do it, almost everybody naturally wants to close their eyes. They naturally want to do it. I did too. So I say, to folks, sometimes what feels natural is good for us. Sometimes what feels natural to us is not good for us. Sometimes we have to break out of our habits. So now if I close my eyes in meditation, it doesn't feel natural anymore. So the point of that is you can kind of recondition yourself if you practice reconditioning yourself every day. Now that's not your goal. When someone starts meditating, their goal is not likely going to be, well, I'm going to recondition myself, how I react, how I respond to things, how I think. You couldn't even imagine that type of thing in the beginning. But as I had mentioned, the experimentation, you start to experiment with the way you think, with the way you feel, with the way you carry yourself, with the way you breathe, with the way you go throughout your whole day. Now, that's if you stick with it for years. I can't, I say after about 6 months, most people, the people in their life are going to notice even before they do. So it's not a short term thing. And we live in an age, where people want quick fixes. Convenience. They want it now. They want it quick. So this is kind of the anti-technology. This is kind of the antidote to the fast pace and all the distraction that we have in our lives. And I think I'm a product of my environment. I grew up in front of the television. When I got out of the service, I needed action. If I wasn't running 30 miles and swimming across a river, I felt like a failure back then. So something in me realized that I got to turn all this technology off on occasion. I got to slow down, man. My life's going too fast. Everything feels too fast. So something in me, in the balance of nature, in the balance of the planet, in God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, it was telling me that this is good for you. Just like brushing your teeth. But I had to learn how to listen to it. And meditation's what helped me listen to the voice. I call it the coach. Some people call it God. Some people call it, whatever they people want to call it's fine with me. I just call it the coach. And when the coach speaks, I just do what the coach tells me to do. Get the oil changed in your car, Mark. So instead of sitting around for a week feeling tension because I know I need to get my oil changed, I just make the appointment and do it. So it takes out all that extra thought, all those extra feelings, that extra tension. So this simplification of Zen practice, it's called Zazen, is the meditation practice. All Zazen means, it just means seated meditation, balanced meditation is all Zen means. We hear Zen quite a bit nowadays, but I've simplified my practice so much that I had to step out of formal Zen practice because I started to see that there were a lot of extra unnecessary things that got in the way of my actual meditation. A lot of social things and hierarchy and things of that nature. So now I practice nothing. I stare at a wall. I'm a teacher of nothing. And I've simplified and that took a lot of courage to do that, really, because I didn't realize, despite the bullets and the bombs and the addictions and jail and everything I've been through, I was really surprised how the hierarchy, the leaders were affecting my thinking and my behavior. I was always thinking, what will they think if I do this? Finally, I said, "That's enough." The coach in me said, "Enough. You practice nothing. Make it simple on yourself." So now I just stare at the wall. And that's kind of what the book's about. All of this in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Mark. Kina, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Mark, I guarantee you there is going to be a lot of people that will listen to this show and be like, this is all fiction. But I can honestly vouch for you and I can back you up with the power of meditation and Eastern practices because I've been there myself. You know, a few years ago, I was blessed enough to go to Thailand and it was a calling for me and it transformed my whole life. And any advice, I can give, to anyone listening to the show right now, if you can go to any Eastern country and actually practice these Eastern practices or remedies, whichever you would like to label it, it will actually make a huge difference in your life. The sad reality about it is not everybody can afford to do so. And then the answer or solution to that would be, okay, let me go on YouTube, you know, but it's not the same thing. And I wish everyone could get that experience. And listening to your story, I mean, you've given us your problems and you've given us the solutions, how to overcome it, like in a natural, organic way. I mean, one of life's most hectic dilemmas, which you have mentioned, is that you had no clue what you wanted to be. And now you're in your 50s and you still have no clue. And there is a lot of people that battle with this question, like, what am I supposed to be doing with my life? Like, why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? And 99% of the time, because this is just how the system is designed, we go down this direction because our family said we need to do so, or because society is going to judge me. And then you go into your adulthood with so much regrets because you end up not doing all the things that you really wanted to do because of all external pressures, so thank you, for sharing that because that is a dilemma. I mean, the reason I went to Thailand is because I thought in my 20s I was accomplished. I've made my parents proud, 50% doing what I love to do. But no, I want to do it 100. But it wasn't making the trip that we on this podcast here today. You know, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be here today. If I connect the dots, Mark, with your life, and you can briefly answer this question, would you say that not knowing what you're doing or what you wanted to do with your life, okay, led you to the Marines by force? Did you live with regret because it wasn't what you wanted to do? It was just sort of like a temporary solution at the time.
Well, no, I can't say that, but I can say that at this point in my life, like you said, we're here on this podcast, right? So we're here right now. I can say that everything that happened previously, even the terrible stuff, it all makes sense. It all contributes to the balance and the perspective and the purpose. You hit the nail right on the head there. There's a lot of folks living without purpose. They don't there's a lot of people that I meet that don't even think they belong on earth, that they have no niche, no role in nature. They have no purpose in living. The future looks bleak. And I was there at one point. But what I can say is I joke around that, I still don't know what I want to do, but I do. I have a purpose. I work with it all stemmed from the meditation position, though, doing it sincerely and not thinking it was going to become a career or I was going to become a guru, or I still don't charge for anything I do because I want to keep that separate. We all need money to live. So I get my money other ways. I don't bring it in. I don't complicate the practice. Like I said, it's all about simplification. But once I stared at that wall in that balanced position for many, many years, people started to notice me in the community. And I ended up working with senior citizens, who are at the end of their life. And I ended up working with incarcerated individuals and also with members of the community who are lost. Like you said, they have no purpose. But I didn't plan any of that. I kept it open. And I think once I got into the balanced position and let kind of the seed grow long enough and stayed out of the way and nourished it in every way, it bore fruit. And this podcast and everything I do with my practice is the fruit, really. So once again, I didn't plan any of that. But you said something very wise, societal pressure, family pressure, My mother still says things like, well, if you don't charge, it's not legitimate. But
Yeah,
I laugh
I
now.
get
I
that a
used
lot
to
too.
take it personal. Yeah. Or she'll say, oh, such and such is doing podcasts and they're making $20,000 a month jumping out of airplanes in sexy outfits or whatever. And but I used to take it personal, but now it makes me laugh, like not in a cynical way. Like my mother's my mother. I'm never going to change her. I have to enjoy her while she's here. And when she says things like that, even though they may irritate me, it's my mom.
Yeah,
So I kind of freed myself from all of those expectations. Family, I freed it from even my religion, even Zen Buddhism, from the organized religion. I freed myself from that. Definitely societally. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes I wish I had a beautiful house in the mountains on a stream, and I know if I would have became a lawyer, these type of thoughts still occur to me. But now they're light, they're not a heavy type thing. So you hear people
yeah,
talk about liberation or enlightenment or freedom or these type of things. For me, it's kind of I'm not competing with anyone anymore. Like I compare myself to my own standards. I'm not comparing to other meditation people or spiritual people or people in society. And that's very liberating. When your parents see you the way they have your whole life. They you can't expect your parents to see you differently. And once I realized that, they've definitely seen a change in me and they've lightened up. They're believers now. So, but still they say
mm,
things, like and that irritate me. But my practice is, so what? I'm irritated. I stop. I take a look at the irritation when my parents are right in front of me. Like, they don't know I'm doing that, but I'm like, "Oh, I'm irritated." Are you going to say something to react to this irritated feeling? Or are you gonna say something completely opposite of the irritation? So, like, I have that power now to stop. Now, not every time, I'm not saying I get it right every single time. That's why it's a practice. You have to practice these things. How do you feel when you get irritated out on the road? Someone cuts you off or someone's rude to you. This elderly gentleman was just rude to me in Walmart the other day. And I was like, I felt like snapping back at the guy, like, "You privileged, white guy." That's what I thought, but I didn't say that. I felt it inside, and I thought, that guy's obviously suffering. Who knows? He may have a health condition, his wife may have just passed away, who knows?" So I just smiled at him and said, "Oh, I'm sorry." Even though inside, the Marine wanted to, punch him in the face. So that's kind of stopping as your life is occurring and kind of taking another look at what's happening in you. I mean, that is powerful. That's freedom right there.
yeah. That day is the perfect answer, and this is just us being in spiritual sync right now. Because when I did ask you this question, I don't believe in regret. And I knew that you wasn't going to focus on the word, too much in response to my question, because the answer that you have just given us now is the answer that I naturally expected you to give. And I need this to actually like sink in, with listeners. So 100% perfect. And by the way, please tell your mother that Kino said don't get fooled by these podcasts online that are flashed because it's fake. It's fake. It's fake. There's a lot of fake going around, so she shouldn't be fooled about that. But I mean, I've also experienced that with my parents as well. But I think, they do finally get, the purpose behind what I do and why I'm not too concerned about what, income I'm getting out of it. There's a bigger play that's going on here. Mark, really quickly, can you explain to us the link between meditation and our seven main energy centers, socially known as chakras? What's the link
What
there?
I have no idea. As I say, I simplify, and that would not be my niche.
Yeah,
I'm sure within me, I felt all those things and worked with them, but because I live in the South of the United States in a predominantly Christian, very conservative area, this was not out of choice. I just had to start using different words. So I couldn't use Buddhist terms. I stopped using any Sanskrit terms, New Age terms, anything. So I don't really use that term. So I was never really interested in looking into it. So it's just a matter of circumstances. I'm not delegitimizing it or saying they don't exist or, but it's just not my niche. I can talk about energy in general, but I don't know if that would answer your question.
I guess for listeners, they will need to research, themselves. But, for anyone that's curious out there, so, men chakras, or from what, I've experienced, with it, with meditation. So we do have our 7 chakras, which is our crown chakra, third eye chakra, throat chakra, heart chakra, solar plexus chakra, sacral chakra, and then your youth chakra. And in my experience, once again, with meditation, there's different types of meditation that assist with those. But for listeners, we're not taking a deep dive into that now. But, it's also something interesting for anybody to go check out and watch each energy point actually focuses on, within your body. So, yeah, thanks. So I would agree with you, Mark. Meditation is a good practice. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of time to master, to calm the mind down, especially living in such a busy world, from the west to the center. It can become quite hectic. But for anyone out there, who can afford to do so or wants to save up, go and experience the East. If we could, I don't know, Mark, if we could get, like more veterans out to the East, I don't know, would you find that to be beneficial for them? If that's something, say, the US government had to do or
Well,
consider?
kind of the message in my book is that you can change the place, you can change the culture, but you may be running because what happens when you get back home and you're right back into your normal routine. So my book emphasizes that you don't need to go anywhere, that you can do all of this, cultivate all this right at home, right where you are. And even if you don't have a wall, if you're homeless, I've helped homeless people establish practices. They stare at brick walls. So, a homeless person in a city in the United States, you don't necessarily associate that with somebody being able to have an experience like that. So, my whole thing is trying to make it as accessible as possible where you don't need to do that. But like I said earlier, I went to Israel to a kibbutz, and that's where I was exposed to meditation, a completely different culture. So obviously, if it's possible, experiencing a different culture, especially the East, where, Eastern thought is more collective, more consideration for your neighbor, whereas Western thought is more individualistic. When you merge the two, it really gets cool. I think that's perfect balance when when you merge the two. I think Eastern thought on its own is problematic to me. Western thought on its own is problematic to me. But if you merge the two, man, you got something really balanced and beautiful. So that's a long answer to your question. But yeah, if you can if you can take off to Thailand or India, man, by all means, even Cambodia, Vietnam, I've spent some time, but I want to spend more time in India in particular. I want to spend time in Vietnam and Cambodia, some of the lesser traveled countries as well, even China. So yeah, that thought's still in me. It's still because it's powerful to experience a different way of thinking and a different culture.
Mark, I was recently on you might have heard this, it's called Movember, Movember. It's an organization that's dedicated to men's mental health. And they have trainings, of which I was recently participating in, on helping therapists understand the role of, quote, masculinity in the man's perception of who he is and who he should be, right? And some of the helpful attributes for that, but also some of the harmful attributes of, quote, traditional masculinity. As in, I'm weak if I ask for help. Suggesting I have a mental health problem is not something that perhaps a man would do, and it can lock a person in, right? And I apologize in a sense because I'm not a man, and I'm I don't want to be mansplaining, as it were, right? But given that there are these stereotypical what a real man does, in the context of many of these real men are dying by suicide. And in fact, there are 3 times as many men who die by suicide than female. Do you have some thoughts about traditional masculinities and a man's mental health and their ability to access meditation?
Yeah, like I come from a tough neighborhood. My dad, he was pretty tough. There wasn't much physical abuse, but there was a lot of, stop being a sissy. I remember when I was really little, I ran home and said, such and such punched me and I was crying. And he said, stop crying and go back and punch them. So that's kind of the way it was back then. And then, of course, being in the Marines, being in a union, being in a rock band, all the things I've done, I had to really take a hard look at that. Even expressing emotions or cultivating something like compassion, that felt really foreign to me for a long time. But because for instance, I can relate to the guys in prison because of my masculinity, right? So I still have that side of me and I like that side of me, but I had to lose the macho type feelings. I had to lose the competing with other men and thinking some men, especially now with social media, I mean, a man portraying success as being, whatever. I mean, it is toxic masculinity. I'm not afraid to say that. But if you find ways to kind of be easier on yourself, I always try to relate these things to like, how do you feel in your skin? How do you feel? Do you feel tense? I think of masculinity as like you're tense, you're on guard, you're puffing your chest out, you're skeptical, you're closed-minded. If you kind of ease up on all that a little, it starts with easing up on yourself, I think. You ease up on yourself and you start looking at yourself realistically, then you realize, man, I'm suffering just like everybody else. Masculinity is kind of like a kind of a false confidence, really, in some cases. I mean, men do have certain chemicals that cause them to be the way they are. And even in the natural world, there's, territory and certain masculine traits. But I think taking a look at that in a way that's kind of independent, I'm my own man. What I think is a man is up to me. It's up to the individual. You can be. I tell my kids this too, and my daughter too. Being a woman, being a man is whatever you can imagine. It does. You don't have to take traditional roles. You don't have to think of yourself as a man. I mean, look at the public shootings nowadays. A lot of times that's young men who think they're getting a purpose. It's pure masculinity. And they'll go into a school or they'll go to a public place. I think that's a result of unrealistic portrayals of men online. So in fact, it's funny. I try to get on these hyper toxic masculinity podcasts. And sometimes I sneak on, but most times they catch me. They see, okay, this guy is not, he's a Marine and he was in jail and he's all this, but he's not going to come and toe the party line here, So I do my part to try to teach my son and whatever men I work with, even the guys in prison that I work with on death row have lightened up. They've moved as far out of that prison mentality as they can being on death row. And if they can do it, anyone can. So it's great that there's organizations out there that are addressing it.
Thank you so much, Mark. I have to say that I feel much more at ease now listening to you and imagining that meditation, which of course has to be taken from imagination into reality. And I appreciate what you said too about how um, we can do the practice wherever we are, right? And that the time is now to do it. There's always a now to begin.
Right.
Now,
Sorry. Meditation's about beginning again. As soon as I think I'm a master or I know something, I realize I need to get back and practice and really focus. Because when I'm feeling great, it's harder to maintain the discipline of practice. It's when I'm feeling crappy and things are going bad that I take it more serious. And I think that's perfect balance as well.
Our listeners learn more about your book and about you and your services.
You can just stare at the wall. It's on all the book distributors, Walmart, Amazon, Goodreads, all that. So it's called Just Stare at the Wall. And then my organization has a website, and of course that's called stareatthewall.org. You could get a lot of information on me there. And I'm accessible. Usually I get back to people as soon as I can, or I have somebody good get back to people. So I'm here if anybody needs me. There's no catch. I don't charge. And I don't even want to be your teacher. I just want to show you how to meditate. And if you need encouragement, I'm here to help you. So it's about establishing your own daily meditation routine and becoming your own teacher so you don't need guys like me.
Thank you again, Mark, so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Kino. I really appreciate everything both of you have said. But Kino's a guy,
Thanks. You
so,
too.
I really appreciate what you said.